From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back to Potomac Watch here. I'm Paul Gigot with Kim Strassel and Kate O'Dell. Chris Christie, the former New Jersey governor, withdrew from the race on Wednesday, and let's listen to him explain why. And then a clip that was picked up inadvertently when he thought he was talking in private, but he had a hot mic criticism of Nikki Haley. Let's listen.
I've always said that if there came a point in time in this race where I couldn't see a path to accomplishing that goal, that I would get out. And it's clear to me tonight that there isn't a path for me to win the nomination, which is why I'm suspending my campaign tonight for President of the United States.
She spent $68 million so far, just on TV. Spent $68 million so far, $59 million by DeSantis, and we spent 12. I mean, who's punching above their weight and who's getting a return on their investment, you know? And she's going to get smoked. And you and I both know it. She's not up to this.
She hasn't even been. She's still 20 points behind Trump in New Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
And, and he's still going to carry out, right?
Yes. Always. I talked to DeSantis called me petrified.
And then the stream was cut and then removed by the campaign, I gather. Kim, you were listening to that hot mic moment.
I was. And I was like, what's going on here? This does not sound like a town hall speech. This sounds like Chris Christie being a little bitter. Look, I give Chris Christie credit. He got into this race with a very clear objective. He said his goal was to deny Donald Trump the nomination. And at this point, it was clear that the best opportunity for that to happen is likely another candidate, and that all he was doing, in fact, especially in New Hampshire, was potentially diverting votes away from, say, a Nikki Haley, who New Hampshire could be the big moment at which this becomes a real race. So I give him credit for sticking to those principles, if that was his actual goal, and getting out. And also following his own advice in the beginning that if he saw no path. Now, someone could argue that might have happened sooner. You know, Mike Pence and Tim Scott got out sooner, and they clear it was not going to make it. Christie was banking everything on New Hampshire, but it's clear that's not working, so he's out. I think he was a little bitter about it. I think those comments are interesting. Again, if your goal is Chris Christie and you do want to deny Donald Trump the nomination, I'm not sure why you would be bashing on his biggest rivals, but it was a hard day for him.
Well, yeah, and the timing of his withdrawal, even before Iowa, but especially before New Hampshire, I think is likely to help Nikki Haley. The polls suggest that most of Christie's voters are amenable to Haley and would probably go there, of course, in part because those voters are looking for somebody who isn't Donald Trump. And Haley has been conscious in trying to forge a strategy that appeals to non-Trump voters who are Republicans and to independents and to Trump voters who might be open to somebody else, whereas Ron DeSantis' strategy has been to try to peel off Trump voters and running to his right, for example, on abortion, for example, on the border and some other issues. And I think Haley's strategy, so far at least, has turned out to be the better one. And if Haley can consolidate the support that's been growing with Christie's, he was been getting about 10-12% in the New Hampshire polls. That means that she could become a competitor. She could potentially give Trump a run for his money in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I mean, she's already at 32 to 39 in one recent poll. So that's pretty close by itself. And to your point about Christie voters, Christie was saying even recently that his voters weren't going to vote for anybody else. But now this is a tacit admission that that's not accurate. And New Hampshire's an open primary. It's a much different clientele than Iowa, where I think
that means that independents can vote for either party.
Right. So it's a different electorate than the type of people who show up in negative weather in Iowa to caucus for somebody. So I think you do need her to at least come within very close striking distance of Trump in New Hampshire for her to be competitive going into South Carolina and Super Tuesday. One quick thing I did find interesting is we don't know what Ron DeSantis was petrified of. Some enterprising IT person got the plug out before we heard. But you do wonder, what is the DeSantis path if he wanted Christie to stay in? It seems to me like this has to get down to a two-way race for anybody to have a chance to take on Trump. So it's not clear to me what the Ron path is from here, given what has to happen for him to have any chance at taking on Trump.
Well, DeSantis did concede after the debate in an interview that he had indeed called Christie and had told him not to drop out, which suggests that he liked the fact that the non-Trump vote was divided in part between Haley and Christie. So, I think he knows that Haley's going to benefit more from Christie dropping out. I was really struck, though, Kim, by a memo. They called it a confidential memo, but it was so confidential that they'd sent it out to the entire media.
Entire press corps.
By John McLaughlin, who's Donald Trump's pollster, a good pollster, but working for Trump. The memo basically says, here's the impact of the Chris Christie withdrawal. And in the memo, it concedes at one point, argues that Christie's withdrawal will only pull Nikki Haley further to the left. I don't know what that means. But he says, for this reason, in a two-way New Hampshire ballot that would factor a Christie withdrawal, President Trump still wins 52% to 44%. Now, okay, it's better to be ahead than behind, but 52-44 at this stage of the campaign with Trump, who's so well-known, universally well-known, leading Haley by only that margin doesn't strike me as a terrific result. And that's Trump's own pollster.
Yep. Nope. And then that's a race, by the way, Paul.
Yeah.
If you get a final result like that, that is a competition, especially if you then see, and I'm not saying that this is what's going to happen, but if you ultimately see a DeSantis withdrawal, I think that memo is broadcasting that Trump's got a race on his hands. And I have said this all along, that while all of the press has continued to focus on Donald Trump's numbers and his advantage in Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina, my argument has been those numbers have been around 50%. And for a guy who was essentially the incumbent in the Republican Party, he was a former president, the name recognition, as you mentioned, but he's essentially the functional equivalent of Joe Biden. Half of the state wants somebody else. That is not an endorsement. That's a problem for Donald Trump. Now, does he still get away with it? Maybe. But so far, he's been getting away with it because the rest of the field is divided. And that is turning out to be a very different calculus so far than where we were in 2016 at this period of time, where there were still numerous candidates in the race, many who have continued on even past South Carolina.
So in the horse race speculation here, let's map out the next 10 days or so. Monday, you get Iowa, and let's say that Trump is held under 50%. And then Haley does reasonably well. Maybe even beats DeSantis in Iowa, if that happens. That would be a pretty significant event, and I think DeSantis would then face having invested so much in Iowa, whether or not to drop out. And then Haley could potentially get some momentum for New Hampshire, where she's already stronger. Independents can vote in that primary. So that could help her as well, because there's really not a big contest on the Democratic side. President Biden isn't even on the ballot, although they're running a write-in campaign for him. Dean Phillips, the congressman, is the only serious challenger to, and I'm not sure how serious that is, but he's running against Biden there on the Democratic ballot. So if Haley comes out of there and makes a run of it 8 days after Iowa in New Hampshire, then you get a month waiting for South Carolina. And South Carolina, of course, she is the former governor, Kate. If that happens, and this is, again, we don't know that it'll happen, that maybe Trump will just so dominate in Iowa that he comes out with momentum himself into New Hampshire. But if something like that scenario I laid out happens, then we've got something of a race going into South Carolina.
Yeah, it could be a wild few weeks. Now, I do think it will be tough for Nikki Haley to win South Carolina, even though it is her home state. I think she's got an uphill battle there. She's not always been popular there. She's, I don't think, popular with the current governor, Henry McMaster.
Who's endorsed Trump.
Right. He's endorsed Trump, and also I think is no great fan of hers. So I think it could be difficult for her. And she's presenting her whole theory as, I've always been underestimated. I'm the underdog. And it is a good stroke of luck. I mean, South Carolina is about as best territory as she can hope for, but I still think Trump has a natural advantage there. But to your point about the gap between the contests, it gives real time for the race to change in dynamics and for it to seem like somebody other than Trump might win, and it's not just a waste of time to go vote.
Right. And I think there'll be some more pressure, Kim. I don't know if you agree with this, but I think there will be more pressure if that scenario occurs coming out of New Hampshire, on Trump to debate Haley one-on-one.
Totally agree. It's been easy for him to duck it, or easier for him to duck it, given the number of people that were on the stage, and he figured just let him duke it out. But if it gets down to a one-on-one and she's getting as much attention as he is, and she's prosecuting her case against him, he may feel compelled to have to get up on a stage and defend himself.
Which would be very, very interesting.